What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk to you about today as we've seen some more severe weather risk that has really escalated over the southern Great Plains and parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. We're going to talk about that first, and then we're going to go ahead and get into the main stuff for today's video, which is the outbreak for tomorrow. And we have also been watching the snow threat, as that has been an increasingly concerning area for me, particularly for areas from Nebraska to Wisconsin. We're going to talk about that as well. And then we're going to just wrap it up with kind of what's going to be left afterward with the severe threat, what's going to be happening in the Carolinas, all those areas as the squall line moves further to the east and those general areas. So we're going to have a lot to talk to you about today. There's no shortage of weather. But before we get into that, we have our head admin, John, who continues to come in clutch with the storm codes. Here's what we have going on right here. We have a hatched code orange in effect for fire weather generally. We are looking at red flag warnings issued for parts of Texas, New Mexico, and those areas. Hatched code yellow for fire weather as well. There's a code yellow for parts of Iowa, Oklahoma, those areas as well as parts of the deep south that are not in the enhanced risk area, as well as parts of the Carolinas that are going to be impacted by severe weather, mainly for that hazard. We have a hatched code orange and a code orange in effect for Louisiana, Mississippi, parts of Arkansas right here for the severe weather risk. And this was what he initially put out, but we did have to do an emergency update because we got an enhanced risk issued for parts of Oklahoma and Texas right here. And right now, this is this area right here from pretty much McKinney all the way through Oklahoma City through to near Stillwater is under a code orange according to Storms United. So we're going to have to pay very close attention and talk about that quite a bit. But let's go ahead and start with today's severe weather threat. We have the latest map pulled out from just about 15 minutes ago. We have a marginal risk from Iowa all the way down to Texas, slight from Kansas to Texas, and Hanson, Texas, and Oklahoma right here. What's driving this is the tornado and the wind risk. We're looking at a 10% tornado risk in the enhanced risk area, which means there's a 10% probability of a tornado happening within 25 miles of a point. Wind risk is at 30%, which means there's a 30% risk of 50 knots or 60 mile per hour gusts or higher happening within 25 miles of a point. And hail, which is the least threat, which is at 15%. Compared to what we're seeing with the other stuff. So we're going to have to take this very seriously. We're going to have to pay attention to this. Let's go ahead and read very quickly what we have going on from the summary for the SPC. Thunderstorms should increase late this evening and merge into a squall line overnight across parts of southern and central Great Plains. Several tornadoes scattered to numerous severe gusts and large hail are all possible. That is the summary from the Storm Prediction Center. This is the 20Z update for you right here. Forecast remains on track and only minor adjustments were made. In particular, the marginal risk was expanded northward, where steepening mid-level RAPS rates and sufficient deep layer shear to the low-level front can promote isolated severe hail risk. Elsewhere, the marginal and slights were expanded slightly. For additional details, see previous discussion below, and we'll look at some of those details real quickly. Recent surface observations show at least low 60s surface dew points into parts of western North Texas and the Red River vicinity of southwestern Oklahoma. This appears to be a little ahead of schedule for some guidance, and with about 12 more hours of low-level moisture return likely ahead of the cold front, concern is increasing that around 63 to 64 degree surface dew points should be in place across parts of the western central Oklahoma into north central Texas by the time convective initiation occurs tonight. Enhanced risk for tornadoes and severe damaging winds has been introduced across parts of this region where confidence of surface-based thunderstorms and the best combination of instability and low-level shear is forecast. So ultimately what we're taking a look at is, from what we're seeing today, this looks like it's going to be a late afternoon to evening threat primarily. There might be some stuff that happens overnight, but ultimately we're going to have to see what's going on. And before we get into the main risk, which is in the deep south, I do want to take a look at some forecast models just to kind of see what's potentially going to be happening. We're going to use the HRRR for this right here just to kind of give you some timing as well as take a look at the initialization of this. Here's what we have. This is what we have for the HRRR. We're going to go ahead and use, actually we can use the, we'll use the 18Z with this since that's the closest out. What we're seeing with this is we're not going to see much convective initiation happening. We'll have some isolated stuff happening in parts of Dallas, Fort Worth, right here, starting around 4 to 5 o'clock. But ultimately, this does look like it's going to have a lesser chance to be severe. This large line of convection that you're noticing around 10 o'clock at night in parts of Kansas and Oklahoma is what's going to be the main concern. And this is going to be that start of that huge squall line. Look at how fast this fires up. It starts off as a little blip right here in southern Kansas, and then it just blows up into a massive line in the span of an hour, according to the HRRR. That is pretty interesting, to say the very least. You go from like nothing to very large hail and very damaging wind gusts in a very short period of time, and that is something I am very concerned about, particularly because it's so late at night. People are going to be going to bed. The weather is going to be starting to fire up very quickly, and then ultimately, like, a lot of people could potentially be caught off guard from this. So if you are in Oklahoma, you are in Kansas, you are in northern Texas tonight, you need to keep your weather radios on at you at all times. As soon as a severe thunderstorm warning is in effect, move into an interior room. As soon as a tornado warning is in effect, get to your storm shelter, get to your basement, because there's quite a bit of shear that could allow for this stuff to go on. And then you have this line really develop. It gets to the Oklahoma City region by around 1 o'clock in the morning. This is going to be a very big overnight threat right here as it moves through. And this is the beginning of the squall line that is going to be moving through the deep south right here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead now and take a quick look at some of the parameters. Let's look at the temperature and see how this is going to ultimately pan out. What we're noticing with this is we're going to see temperatures in parts of Oklahoma right here hovering around 60 degrees or so generally, and you're looking at areas like DFW like in the upper 60s. Mid to upper 60s as well, so we're going to have to pay attention to that. Here's the dew point temperature. Dew point temperature is actually, we're basing on what we're taking a look at. We're looking at a very saturated environment, and that's why convection is going to so rapidly just boom, go up and just turn into a massive squall line like real fast. And you also are noticing this dry line and that cold front that's going to be over here as well. That's going to help initialize a lot of that convection. As soon as the front hits that instability, we're going to go whoosh, and all that energy that's been building and building and building today across that region is just going to explode at a very quick rate. So that's what we have going on for tonight for parts of Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, those areas right there. I also want to take a look at some of the instability with this. Here's the Cape. Cape is going to be very interesting. This is the hour before things start to pan out. There is some sin with this. There is some cap with this, but we're looking at up to about 2300 joules per kilogram of Cape, which for that part of the region, particularly, that's going to be decent for thunderstorms, and that's what this system is ultimately going to be developing in once that front starts to hit that part of the region. Because once it does, according to the HRRR, it's going to start blowing up thunderstorms very quickly. And you're looking at well over 2,000 joules per kilogram of Cape. And that instability generally continues as that cap breaks, as it moves through parts of Oklahoma and Texas as well. And then you're going to start seeing a new threat emerging for parts of the deep south, but we will get to that later. Let's take a look at the supercell composite with this. This is the hour before convective initiation is supposed to start. We're looking at supercell composite cracking 20 in some of these areas. That should tell you that this is very conducive for thunderstorm development, and we're going to have to take this very seriously as well. Here's the SIG-TOR parameter. SIG-TOR parameter, the HRRR has a hard time with this, but so we won't really, we'll take that with a grain of salt. I want to take a look at the SRH with this as well. SRH is going to be pretty interesting. Right here, we're looking at over 700, up to 700 SRH, like storm relative helicity, from 0 to 3 kilometers. From 0 to 1 kilometers, we're looking at SRH cracking 400 to 500 across a lot of these areas in Oklahoma. So there is a lot of energy, and there's a lot of moving parts that are going to be allowing for this system to really blow up once it does overnight, which should start around between 9 and 10 o'clock tonight if you are in western Oklahoma. If you are in OKC, if you are in Dallas and you are tuning into this, you have your weather radios on you at all times, because this is going to be likely an overnight type of threat for you. I was thinking when I first looked at this, okay, this is going to be like early evening, into the overnight. But taking a look back at this again, this is mainly going to be an overnight threat and the start of the severe weather threat that's going to be happening tomorrow. So let's go ahead and take a look at the SPCs. look for that as well. We have an enhanced risk from southwestern Oklahoma all the way to Mobile, Alabama, into the Florida Panhandle. Slight risk encompassing much of the deep south, marginal from Kansas all the way to Georgia. We're going to have to see how this ultimately pans out, and this is going to be a continuation as to what we're seeing tonight. Here's the what we're looking at for tornado risk. We have a 10% hatched risk for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida, as well as the extreme southern tip of Arkansas over there. What that ultimately means is we have a 10% risk of strong tornadoes, which are classified as EF2 to EF5 tornadoes, likely happening with 25 miles to a point. You have a 10% probability of that. That is what's warranting this enhanced risk. I'm going to say this right now. This is likely going to stay enhanced given the convective initiation we're going to see tonight. But hey, you never know. This could go moderate unexpectedly tomorrow afternoon. We're going to have to see how this pans out. Wind risk is 30 hatched for Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. We're looking at a 30% risk right here of damaging wind gusts of 60 knots, actually 65 knots, or 75 miles per hour or greater happening within 25 miles of a point in this hatched area. Rest of the areas, it's 50 knots within a 25-mile basis. And then the hail risk has actually come down quite a bit. And we're looking at only a 5% risk of hail, and the main hail threat is going to be tonight. This is going to likely be because even though there is a chance that there still could be something that more discrete that happens for much of the deep south right here, it's going to mainly be a massive squall line, and the wind threat is what's generally going to be driving that those hazards right there. But tornadoes, especially in that squall line, are very possible with this, and we're going to have to pay attention, especially given the shear that the system is going to have. But here's what we have going on. Here's the summary. Severe storms with a threat of tornadoes, damaging winds, and isolated hail are possible on Tuesday from eastern portions of the southern plains into the lower Mississippi Valley and southeast. A couple of strong tornadoes will be possible. There's the synopsis right here. We're going to mainly ignore that because that's more technical stuff. Here's the important part right here. Organized convection will likely be ongoing at the start of the forecast period Tuesday morning across portions of eastern Oklahoma and Texas, and perhaps southeast Kansas. The extent to which the morning convection will become surface-based remains somewhat uncertain, but very strong low-level and deep layer shear are sufficient instability will support a conditional risk of all severe hazards with the early day storms as they approach the Arklatex region. A strongly sheared QLCS, which is another term for squall line, is expected to approach the lower Mississippi Valley region by early afternoon. The magnitude of the severe threat with this QLCS, as well as the potential for preceding supercells, will be determined by the extent of which the lower level moistening can keep pace with the primary convective line. Very strong flow in the lowest 3 kilometers and 0 to 1 kilometer SRH, increasing about 400 meters squared per second squared, will support a threat of potentially widespread damaging winds and line-embedded tornadoes wherever this organized QLCS can remain near surface-based. So generally what you're looking at right here, and if you don't quite understand how big of a value that SRH is, 100 at surface to 1 is considered conducive for severe weather. 200 is conducive for much bigger stuff. Like anything over 300 is considered extreme, especially at surface to 1 kilometer. At surface to 3 kilometer, anything over 600 is considered extreme. So I just figured I'd get that out of the way and give you the context to all of that right there. But by and large, this is gonna be a very serious situation that we're gonna have to pay attention to both tonight and tomorrow. The northern edge of the organized severe potential will be constrained by increasingly prohibitive low-level stability. However, given the strength of the flow fields and the organized convection that persists into late Tuesday and early Wednesday can pose some risk of damaging winds, with some tornado threat persisting in closer proximity to the Gulf Coast. So that's what the SPC is going for day 2, and we're going to have to pay attention to that as well. We also have this risk out here. Not really that much has changed. I'm not going to go over it. That's beating a dead horse, to be honest. And then we have what we have going on with the NWS. We have winter storm watches right now in effect for Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those areas as well, mainly because on the backside of this cyclone, on the backside of the severe weather, for areas that further to the north that are not going to see these effects, you're looking at potentially up to 6 inches of snow or greater. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we're looking at, and potentially for parts of Iowa right here, for parts of Des Moines. Let's go ahead and go to Fort Dodge for the winter storm watch. in effect over here. Here's what we have going on right here. Winter storm watch is in effect. We are looking at blizzard conditions possible, light to moderate snow accumulation possible. Winds in excess of 50 miles per hour is possible with this. So these areas from Wisconsin to Nebraska could see blizzard conditions with the backside of the storm, because the pressure gradient, and we talked about in yesterday's video, is going to be so tight that it's going to allow for that pressure gradient force to increase and drive the wind speeds up to about 50 miles per hour, according to the National Weather Service. So by and large, we're going to have to pay very close attention to this, and we're going to have to watch this very extensively. Let's go ahead and talk about the severe weather threat first, and then generally take a look at what's going on further north. Here's the severe weather threat. You're seeing in an area of instability in parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, those areas right there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the precipitation simulated reflectivity as well. So ultimately, it is going to be more squally from compared to what we were potentially seeing a few days ago. But we are seeing the chance for discrete stuff organizing and developing ahead of that line. And depending on what happens, will depend on how bad the threat is going to be for tornadoes. But ultimately, I do think the wind risk is the main risk for right now. But tornadoes are absolutely something you're going to want to pay attention to. Large hail, I'm not too worried about that by and large. But ultimately, that's what we have going on. Then the squall line moves into the Carolinas. We have decent instability. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the shear real quickly. We're going to have to pull up the NAM. This is the 18Z NAM. I want to take a look at the 500 millibar jet just to kind of show you what we're looking at. This wind is going to be whipping through much of the deep south. We're looking at over 120 knots still at 500 millibars right here, which for those of you who do not know, that where this is at is about 18,000 feet up or so. So you're going to want to pay attention to this. At 850, you're still looking at up to 90 knots of wind speed with this. And I do want to take a quick gander at what we're looking at in terms of the soundings for parts of Louisiana and Mississippi right here, just to get a general idea and just to get some more context as to what potential hazards we're going to be seeing with this. So here's what we have going on. Look at this wind shear, ladies and gentlemen. We're looking at almost 50 knots of wind shear at surface to 1 kilometer and over 600 SRH. If we had more CAPE and we had more instability in the atmosphere, this would obviously be a high and moderate. But the one thing that is inhibiting this from being a very big severe weather outbreak, kind of like with the moderate and the high risks we see with those kinds of affiliated outbreaks, is because we don't have enough CAPE and it's not over an extensive area. That's the only reason we do not have a moderate risk right now. The CAPE is not strong enough. We're looking at max 1,500 joules per kilogram, which is for the deep south still quite a bit. But there's so much uncertainty surrounding that we don't know what's going to exactly happen. We're going to have to pay attention to that as well. But 74 knots at 6 for your bulk shear and 48 knots at surface to 1 kilometer. If anything organizes like supercellular, that is going to ultimately get very tornadic very quickly. We'll have to see how discrete it ultimately gets, but that's the general gist as to what we're seeing. Let's go ahead and very quickly talk about the snow threat very quickly. Let's go ahead and show you the accumulation that we're seeing with this as well. This is moving out of the area. It's going to be bringing a lot of snow on the backside of this. Let's go ahead and take a look at the snow accumulation. Take a look at this from the NAM, ladies and gentlemen. We are looking at up to a foot of snow and possibly up to 20 inches of snow, because there's going to be lake effect snow on the backside of this in the upper peninsula of Michigan. The fact that we are still potentially going to be seeing this kind of snow in March in this part is pretty interesting, and we're going to have to see how this ultimately pans out. Cross-checking, taking a look at the HRST, still you're seeing a lot of snow with this. If you're in Nebraska, up to 8 inches of snow. If you're near St. Cloud, Rochester, those areas in Minnesota, up to a foot. Upper Peninsula of Michigan is going to get the jackpot of this, though, mainly due to lake effect and all of those things right there. But that is something you're going to want to take very seriously, whether you are in the Midwest, whether you're in the Deep South, all those areas, because this is going to be a very wild ride for the next 36 hours. and we're going to continue to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. If you want to support the channel more directly, be sure to join my Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. I'm going to be releasing a documentary tomorrow for you guys to enjoy while the severe weather risk is going on. I'm really excited for it. I've been working very hard on it, so stay tuned for that. Come join the Storms United Discord server if you have any questions. If you want to just hang out with us, the link is in the end screen. But with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.